Soviet immigrants often have this discussion. How did our parents get to be who they are? Was it Stalin and company, or is it just them? Which part is their personality, and which part is the weight of history that had just fallen on their head and just bonked them like a coconut? And so this was a kind of psychoanalysis. So I also decided to try to find out which part of me are, the Shteyngart that's been groomed in America, that went to the Oberlin Institute for Advanced Individuals, all that kind of stuff, and which part is still the remainders of the Russian residue and I've spent all my novels novels and the memoir trying to ask that question. The question maybe boiled down to, can one change? The American answer is, of course, yes. I mean, boy, can we change. There's many acts to one's life. And the Russian answer is no. So negotiating between those two terrains is, I think, the project of the book. There was misogynism mixed in with racism, homophobia, you name it. It was, Soviet Union was this supposedly progressive utopian, but it had all of that. And in today's, it had to be pressed underground. You couldn't use it, except for anti-Semitic stuff. You couldn't quite put it out in the media, right? But it existed in the home. It existed elsewhere. And when the curtain collapsed, all that stuff began to flow out. One could almost make the argument that some of that stuff is flowing from Eastern Europe and into our own discourse. When I started writing my own opinions about Trump, I was bombarded by, thousands, probably a lot from Organa. But the insults that they were using were the same insults that my parents had endured. You're a big-nosed Jew, pictures of me in pizza ovens, the usual happy stuff that exists on the internet. That's what the internet is for. And it really reminded me so much of like this flashback to Russia. And at that time, we didn't know yet that so much of it originated there. But it was the perfect kind of closure, if you will. My parents, because they knew I had a big mouth, because I was always talking about Lenin and his magical goose and all that, they didn't even tell me we were going to America until the very last day, right before I was flying out. So I knew very little about all that stuff that was happening. They didn't, because we were really living on tenterhooks. There was a possibility at the last moment they'll cancel your visa. What happens then? You become a refusnik, so then you can't get a job, etc. So they were very careful, knowing what a loudmouth I was. I only found out about all that stuff when we left. When we landed in Vienna, we transited through East Berlin. Vienna was the first gasp of freedom, and that's what my father said. Everything you've been taught is a lie. The army isn't great, and have a strudel, by the way. Yeah. So my parents' project when they came here, they believed two things. They believed that America was the greatest country ever. Capitalism, everything was great. They also believed that Americans were not very smart. These are two conflicting things, but they thought culturally they were idiots. So their project was to make sure that almost no American culture got into the house, which meant it was very easy to do. They just threw out the television. We never had a television. Instead, everything was Chekhov. There was just live Chekhov, Turgenev. Everything was that. And it was very understood, and they would read, and so I kept up reading Russian. The house, we could only speak Russian. There was no English conversation. And in this way, it was interesting because my parents didn't learn English as well as they could, because having a child who speaks the language at home really helps adults learn the language as well. But they were willing to sacrifice the English part so that I would maintain Russian. And even to this day, I speak Russian very well. But yes, I had an accent until I was about 14. And I worked really hard at it because, again, at home there was so much Russian that I would carry the accent into the school. So I bought records and I would try to sing to them. So I bought Neil Diamond. And I would sing, "They coming to America." And it would get better and better and better. And I would practice in front of the mirror and I would ape the way the mouth worked, etc. Because I'm good at accents, but I'm bad at everything else, like grammar. And so eventually the accent began to fade away. But I really am very grateful for my parents because so many, my wife was of Korean heritage. She was born in America, but they just don't have that kind of exposure, and that culture goes away. And my entire life has really been about balancing two cultures. Now that I'm really worried about this country, I feel more invested, involved. I mean, I really think that my next novel is set here. And I think the next novel will also be set in America. I mean, they all were set in America, but without sort of this kind of Soviet Jewish patina on it. I do feel as an American, but I mean, it's a very specific identity. Soviet Jewish, it's a big identity.
Yeah.
I have friends from many different parts of the world, and each one has a slightly different, so if you're British or Canadian, you can blend in much easier. But people from certain societies, I think it's because, there really was an Iron Curtain back then. So many of the people I know, my friends from, let's say, India or Korea, I mean, they grew up in quasi-capitalist societies. They had, India's a little different, but they had access to things. It wasn't like a completely new world. Whereas coming from the Soviet Union, we had nothing. All we had was an ABBA record.
Right.
That was our only idea of American culture. And my mother would sing it so beautifully because it was about her favorite topic, the song Money. Money, 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 in a rich man's world. So, I don't know. And I used to go to Russia quite a bit. I don't anymore. I feel like that passion that I had for figuring it out, who I am, based on figuring out who my parents are, based on figuring out what Russia is, I feel like that project has been carried out successfully or not, I don't know. But these days, especially with what's happening, I feel that, that my loyalties are here.